Boo! Just kidding. Hi, I'm Duncan Bucket. And do you remember Ghostbusters? Released in 1984, Ghostbusters is a film from director Ivan Reitman, with a script from Harold Ramis, known for his various studio comedies, and Dan Aykroyd, a prime player in the Not Ready for Primetime Players, made famous by their appearance alongside Spider-Man in Marvel Team-Up No. 74. Pitched as a vehicle for both Aykroyd and the late John Belushi, the movie went through multiple drafts featuring things like time travel and alien ghosts, before settling on the movie we know now, with Ernie Hudson and Bill Murray in the place of Belushi after his passing. The movie features 3 university professors, Ray Stantz, Egon Spengler, and Peter Venkman, who, after getting kicked from their university jobs, create a business where they bust ghosts. Ghostbusters, if you will. As Ghostbusters, they take the city by storm, capturing a funny little green guy, getting media coverage from tabloids to the radio, all the way to the late night circuit on Larry King. Even the ghosts are thankful, giving Ray a crisp high five for his trouble. Nothing else. Do not read into that. All the while, spooky things are going on at the apartment of Dana Barrett. After hiring a 4th member in Winston Zedmore, Dana and her neighbour Louis Tully are possessed by the spirit of Zool, and that pesky local government decide to shut down the power to Ghostbusters HQ, unleashing ghosts to terrorise the city. Somehow, that's the city's fault, and not the sudden rise of a company keeping hundreds of ghosts in a bin. They bust the ghosts and Gozer the Gozerian, accidentally summon the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man as the destroyer of worlds, but in the end, these 4 schlubs end up saving the day. Like the song! It's a classic. The movie is a perfect mix of talent coming together to make something incredible. The script is a masterclass in tone, balancing the real deadly world-ending threat of Armageddon against 4 slimeball exterminators using the situation to make a quick buck. The cast play their parts wonderfully, with Murray as Venkman's dry wit along with Egon really milking every penny out of their customers. He's the brains of the group, but his awkwardness and eccentricities contrast well with the childlike wonder of Aykroyd's Ray, whose excitement around ghosts and the paranormal is just infectious. They're all grounded by Hudson as Winston, an employee from outside the space of paranormal investigation, who's epitomised with the best line in the movie.
Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis?
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
Reitman's direction, alongside the work of cinematographer Laszlo Kovacs, create this grounded, naturalistic shooting style, punctuated with the occasional larger-than-life shot to really frame the supernatural threat, bolstered by the wonderful special effects headed up by Richard Edlund. And you can't talk about Ghostbusters without at least mentioning the music. The original score by Elmer Bernstein uses outdated instruments to give this feeling of stumbling upon spirits decades outside of their time. And the theme song, the aptly titled Ghostbusters by Ray Parker Jr., is iconic for a reason. It is a little similar to Huey Lewis and the News as I Want a New Drug, in the same way that Aldi's own Jaffa Cakes are a little similar to McVitie's Jaffa Cakes. Which is to say, they're much better. Get fucked, McVitie's, and get fucked, Huey Lewis. And you can fuck your news too. People have discussed this movie to death for good reason. It made absolute bank at the box office, becoming the highest grossing movie of the summer of 1984 and the second highest grossing movie of that year. The Wikipedia article even states that it launched a multi-billion-dollar multimedia franchise. But did it though? The original movie really didn't launch with that much merchandise. You get a ghost in a can or mail in for a shirt, but most of it didn't come until way later. Even the infamous NES game didn't come out till the end of 1988, based on a version from the end of 1984 that was rushed into production and finished in 6 weeks. Come on though. They had to. I mean, we all remember Ghostbusters, right? Like, We all remember the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right? And how terrifying it was? Even though it was only in the movie for about 5 minutes. What about Slimer though? Remember them? Well, actually, they're not even referred to as Slimer in the script. They're just referred to as the onion-headed vapor. But these are iconic. It's Ghostbusters. No one could forget proton packs or Twinkies. Remember the Twinkies? But that's not what Ghostbusters was, is it? Go back and read the reviews. These are not the elements people connected to. In his review, Roger Ebert wrote,
Ghostbusters is one of the rare movies where the original, fragile comic vision has survived a multi-million-dollar production. It's not a complete vindication for big-budget comedies, since it's still true, as a general rule, that the more you spend, the fewer laughs you get. But it uses its money wisely, and when that monster marches down a Manhattan Avenue and climbs the side of a skyscraper, we're glad they spent the money on special effects, because it gets one of the biggest laughs in a long time.
It was a funny comedy with all of these elements alongside, but they were never the focus. So, I feel like I have to ask this again. Do you remember Ghostbusters? Like, shit, does anybody remember Ghostbusters? Picture this. It's the 1980s. IBM have just launched their first computer. The Berlin Wall has collapsed, and Mr. Brightside by the Killers is tearing up the charts. Two relevant things happened in this decade. The Coca-Cola company bought Columbia in an unprecedented move that I'll discuss further in a bit. If you want to know more, Google Coca-Cola Columbia and tell me what you find. And Ronald Reagan was elected. These two events could be connected due to the mass deregulation of corporate income taxes and the lack of government intervention in massive shady deals. It's superficially connected to Ghostbusters, but enough people have talked about that. To find out the true link, we have to go back even further. All the way back to the 1960s. JFK is in office, the US has successfully landed on the moon, and a certain mop-top group of Liverpudlians are capturing the hearts of teen girls all around the world. That's right, it's the Killers with their seminal hit, Mr. Brightside. TV, still a burgeoning industry, didn't have that many rules in place to regulate advertisements. This was fine for adults who thought they understood marketing, not so good for children who didn't. Marketing executives, being the scum of the earth, took advantage of this by hiding product ads within kid shows, to make kids persuade parents to buy products. Romper Room was a children's variety show. It was basically a babysitter so kids could learn manners, have fun, and be presented with the Word of God. It was very Christian. They even had their own branded prayer. God loved Romper Room. The show had a toy line, which they worked into the show, so the kids would watch the show, learn something, and then come out with the knowledge that if they wanted to bring the fun of Romper Room home, they'd have to buy the toys. God, supposedly completely fine with this? Parents were not. So a bunch of them got together and formed the Action for Children's Television in 1968, with the main goal of trying to regulate what could be shown to children. And over time, they got a foothold. The Boston edition of Romper Room was their first target, which slowly led to Romper Room stopping all product placement within the show. They were also able to get a bunch of shows cancelled, and their pressure towards the Federal Communications Commission, the main party overseeing television and radio, started changing children's television for the better, with clear demands and guidelines being followed by a lot of channels. Things were looking up for children's television. Then along came Ronald Reagan. One of Reagan's main talking points was deregulation. His idea was that for the market to thrive, the government should have no intervention in the free market. He gets into office, and one of his first big actions is appointing a new head to the FCC, Mark S. Fowler, who agreed with his policies about deregulation. So the FCC went to war with ACT. In one corner, you had ACT, who created a 60,000-page document that proved, without a doubt, the negative effect that advertisements had towards children. In the other corner, you had Mark S. Fowler. He had money. I'll give you 2 guesses on who won that one. This is what created pop culture in the 80s. Educational shows got booed, and in their place came mountains of licensed children's television. Now the companies could just advertise to children without intervention. They threw everything at it. Every sugar-infested cereal got a mascot. Ad breaks got longer, and the shows themselves became advertisements. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles. These were all shows created specifically to launch toy lines. Every week, you could tune into the newest adventures of Optimus Prime, Leonardo, whoever the fuck the protagonist of G.I. Joe was, and then some new toy would show up on shelves the next day. Spoiler alert for the end of the decade, ACT were able to convince the House of Congress that children's safety was worth more than money, and a bill to introduce more regulations back into children's television was passed. However, right before he left office, known child hater Ronald Reagan binned the entire bill, saying it was an unconstitutional infringement on freedom of expression. That's my Ronald Reagan impression. We have this burgeoning new market and an incredibly successful studio comedy ripe for the picking. What is any self-respecting billion-dollar corporation to do in a situation like this? Coca-Cola's Columbia had absolutely no faith in the movie before it came out. They didn't even want to license out the name. There's product placement in the movie. Anytime you see a drink that isn't a beer, it'll probably be a Coke. And there was merchandise produced, but once the movie did well, they were scrambling for any way to make more money from it. They had to keep the train rolling because they were running out of opportunities to push the Ghostbusters, which is when Dick Entertainment gave them what they needed on a silver platter, pitching the show that would become the real Ghostbusters. 5 seasons of Saturday morning cartoons that they would use to launch a wildly successful toy line. There are a lot of changes from the movie. The jumpsuits are different, Ray is rounder, Venkman is more chiseled, Winston looks younger, and Egon is blonde and has the hair of a 50s greaser. The show also has a much bigger focus on Slimer. The show has a lot of Slimer. The first episode of the show is a bizarrely paced bit of television. The Ghostbusters go to a haunted chocolate factory, where a bunch of weird ghosts are hanging out and causing a ruckus. Ray gets sprayed with brown goo, presumably chocolate, but then Venkman says,
"Reminds me of a college party I went to once."
The antagonists of the episode, 3 ghosts captured in the factory, are Snarg, the lanky pink mother, Slug, the little orange goblin father, and Zonk, their idiot son who has a big nose and wears a diaper. The ghosts escape due to shenanigans with Slimer, and they set up a rival business to take the Ghostbusters down a peg by faking ghost captures, but they accidentally end up unleashing a giant toy ghost that the crew have to capture, leading to a massive chase down the highway in the Ecto-1. But they can't catch them with just the car, so while Venkman and Winston stay in the car, Egon and Ray head them off in the all-new Ecto-2, a blue and orange tricycle gyrocopter with a grappling hook on board that ends up completely destroyed by the end of the episode as Egon sets it to blow, taking out the ghost. I neglected to mention this until this point, but Slimer has a character arc in this episode. Everybody's pissed at them for eating the chocolates they got from the job at the beginning, so Slimer spends the whole episode thinking nobody appreciates them. This crescendos with Slimer seemingly sacrificing their own life to help stop the toy ghost.
Slimer, wait! No, Slimer, don't do it!
We'll fucking miss you, Slimer, you beautiful bastard. They saved the day and the city rejoices. End of the episode. The credits are a little recreation of the Ghostbusters music video with them all doing a little step dance with Slimer in place of Ray Parker Jr. They even get revenge on Bill Murray for being a goofball by attempting to murder him. It's easy to tell how this was translated into toys, right? The 4 Ghostbusters with differently coloured jumpsuits, Slimer's design has been made much cuter with orange eyes to contrast, Ecto-2 is a completely new vehicle never mentioned before, and 3 ghosts are introduced with wildly colourful designs made up of strange shapes. They would all make great toys. Yes, you are correct. They would. None of these ghosts ever appeared in the toy line that was based on the show. Not even the Thing, literally referred to as the toy ghost, got a toy. Obviously, the original Ghostbusters got toys, as did Slimer, but none of the original designs ever appeared. The only one that did was Ecto-2, which came out 2 years after this episode aired. You know what did get a toy though? The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, who did not even appear in the show until the 2nd season outside of the intro. It got a toy in the first fucking phase. Then what was the deal with the toys then? Doesn't matter because they still made bank. The first wave was only sold through pre-orders in the Christmas of 1986 and sold out instantly. And they made so much more after that. Ghost putty, vehicles, figures, sweets, and cereal, with its own awful rendition of the Ghostbusters theme.
There's a new cereal in the neighborhood with O's and ghosts.
Tastes real good! Ghostbusters!
The toys would then start to become the show as it went on. Slimer got insanely popular. You can tell because they started making more Slimer things. They made multiple Slimer sweets to rot your teeth, and on the opposite end, they made Slimer toothpaste. Ugh. In a Den of Geek article, some of the writers and producers involved in the show went over its history, and it's mentioned that a fair bit of studio meddling was involved to make the show become this.
Eager to improve ratings for its Saturday morning lineup of shows, they drafted in a consultancy firm called Q5, who from the 3rd season onwards began making changes that altered the makeup of the show entirely. There was less satire and less of the subtle, sophisticated verbal humour that had made the cartoon such a fine sparring partner for the film.
This would lead to the show's downfall much later down the line, but also led to the obsession over icons, as the show became dictated by the most popular iconography, to the point where Stay Puft became friends with the Ghostbusters because, once again, the toys sold well. Side note, I know I just used this article as a source, so you'd assume I thought it was trustworthy, but nope. This article is just filled with straight up lies and weird quotes from people who worked on the show. Do you want to know how they decided that Winston loved murder mysteries?
The scene in which Winston talks about the Bible and theorizes that the recent spate of spiritual activity could be linked to the potential onset of Judgment Day proved to be a major inspiration. Winston cracks the case right there, Hickey says. We saw that, and right away, there was more to him than meets the eye. He's a very literate guy.
I'm sorry. You decided that the key to Winston's character was that he's very literate because he's read the Bible. Ah yes, Winston's favourite authors, Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, and God! Also, I only just noticed this while reading the article again for quotes. When talking about how they wanted to keep it faithful to the original, one of the show's writers mentions how they kept track of the characters' personalities. And when talking about Slimer, they say, and this is a direct quote, "The rule with Slimer was to imagine him as a 7-year-old boy. That was how you wrote for him. They made him their pet." It's probably just poor phrasing, but They kept a 7-year-old boy as their pet? What the fuck do you mean? I know this kind of breaks the pacing, but I just wanted to mention it so you knew you could trust me. I would not lie to you for content, okay? Anyway, the damage had been done and Ghostbusters was relevant again. Columbia Pictures weren't doing too hot in their movies. While Ghostbusters and The Karate Kid did well, they also had a string of massive failures like Ishtar and The Razor's Edge. Bill Murray's passion project that bombed so hard that he quit acting to study philosophy in Paris for 4 years. So what better way to make some guaranteed money than a sequel to one of the biggest comedies ever made? To fully discuss Ghostbusters 2, I need to say a sentence that I am fairly certain no one has ever said on video before. I'm going somewhere with it, so stick with me. Ghostbusters 2 has the unmistakable vibe of post-9/11 fiction. Let's talk about superhero comics. Superhero comics come onto the scene. The protagonists are cool, morally righteous, and badass. Heroes like Batman and Superman were paragons and role models kids could look up to. There's a lot to dissect in that and the weird, fashy adjacent ideas of the Ubermensch, but I'm not here to take that apart. Do you know who were? Comic writers in the 80s and 90s. Books like Alan Moore's Watchmen became popular and slowly became the norm. Heroes were now morally grey, and comics didn't always portray them as good with moral lessons to teach. Then, 9/11 happened. Remember 9/11? Do you want me to explain 9/11 to you? Because, honestly, I don't want to. 9/11? Major bummer. After 9/11, a lot changed. Superheroes returned to being heroic, one of the first major examples being issue 36 of J. Michael Straczynski's run on Amazing Spider-Man, where Spidey has to deal with the aftermath of 9/11. It gave us one of the funniest comic pages ever produced.
Even those we thought our enemies are here, because some things surpass rivalries and borders. Because the story of humanity is written not in towers, but in tears. In the common coin of blood and bone. In the voice that speaks within even the worst of us and says, this is not right. Because even the worst of us, however scarred, are still human, still feel, still mourn the random death of innocence.
To summarise, post 9/11, the cynicism of 90s superhero fiction was washed away for uncritical patriotism and circle-jerk morals about coming together under tragedy. And we can use this framework to view Ghostbusters 2 in comparison with the first, even if it came out in 1989. Ghostbusters 2 is about the Ghostbusters, now disillusioned and split up after the city sues them for the events of the last movie, coming together again to fight Vigo Carpathian, and a bunch of pink slime that makes everybody angry and inanimate objects dance. A large part of post 9/11 fiction is American exceptionalism and patriotism over symbols. Captain America salutes the troops. The Raimi Spider-Man trilogy has an ungodly amount of shots of Spider-Man in front of the American flag, etc. Ghostbusters 2 ends with the Ghostbusters covering the Statue of Liberty with slime and using it to unite the city and destroy evil. This carries over to how the characters are portrayed. In the first movie, the Ghostbusters were not good people. Egon uses people as guinea pigs and alongside Peter, repeatedly rips off their customers. Speaking of Peter, he can't take no for an answer and uses his position as a Ghostbuster to try and get with Dana. Ray has a child's imagination and doesn't properly think through his decisions, and Winston is fine endangering the city for a paycheck. They do save the day, but part of the joke of the first movie is that they're bad people. 2 changes it so the Ghostbusters develop into figures who literally become legends. There's a hint of that original tone at the beginning of the movie where the Ghostbusters have to start back at square one, but then Egon, Ray and Venkman are just investigating the pink slime out of the goodness of their hearts, and Venkman is now obsessed with becoming a father. If you're wondering where Winston is in all that, so was I. This is the vibe of post 9/11 fiction. It's sanding down the first movie to create a beat-by-beat retelling with a story about American heroes uniting and preserving the American way bolted on, without a hint of the irony that made the first movie so captivating. The real reason for these changes? The show that was made for children, obviously. It's all there. The push towards moral messaging, the changes to the characters being representative of more traditional ideals like helping each other or starting a family, Slimer returning in a capacity where he is now an accredited member of the cast. Not the person who manned the puppet, not the person who voiced Slimer. Slimer. Just Slimer is credited alongside Dan Aykroyd, the real man. It's all aiming for the audience that made the real Ghostbusters such a smash hit. It's why the studio was so adamant that the movie get made. People working on the show even pointed out that the original version of the movie didn't feature Slimer. It was only when Joe Medchuk and Michael C. Gross, longtime producers of the franchise up until the 2016 reboot, pointed out that Slimer was so popular in the cartoon that Slimer was even considered for the difficult role of Slimer. One thing the real Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, and 9/11 do have in common though, aside from the Ghostbusters wiki page for the World Trade Center, is the frightening amount of merchandise produced for each event. The merchandise for Ghostbusters 2 dwarfed the first movie, with a steady stream coming from the release of the movie all the way to 1991. 2 novels, jigsaw puzzles, Coca-Cola cups, mugs, ghost glasses. You didn't even need to make new toys because the toys for the real Ghostbusters were already on shelves. Just slap Ghostbusters 2 branding on it, chuck a few things from the film in the line, and you'll be fine. Also of note, the official soundtrack album of the movie, available from all good record suppliers. The biggest track is Bobby Brown's On Our Own. It's an interesting track because the song is barely about Ghostbusters. There is a single verse that is a synopsis of the movie, repeated twice, making up 40 seconds of this 5-minute song. 13.6% of this Ghostbusters song has anything to do with Ghostbusters. You could get a meal from Hardee's, branded for the movie, with a small toy, a Slimer shake. Companies were obsessed with making Slimer edible. And a poster advertising the movie that read,
"Who are you going to call? How about Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Sigourney Weaver, Harold Ramis, Rick Moranis and Ernie Hudson? Columbia Pictures is pleased to announce the Ghostbusters are back, to fight for good, vanquish evil, restore peace, and maybe party a little. So if you loved Ghostbusters, the original supernatural comedy, it's only natural you'll love Ghostbusters 2.
Ghostbusters 2 was a failure. Despite everything, it just didn't do well. Critically, it was seen as unfunny, formulaic, and a pale imitation trying to cash in on the original. And while it broke even, the studio considered it a pretty big loss. One big reason for this was timing. It released in June of 1989, and to be fair, it did break the record for the biggest opening weekend of all time. For all of a week, because 1 week after, what became the second highest grossing movie of the year, Batman released, which, alongside Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, effectively shot Ghostbusters 2 out of the audiences it needed the most, leading to the movie's more disappointing box office. Regardless of context, there is something objectively hilarious that Ghostbusters 2 was beaten out by Batman. Have you seen Tim Burton's Batman? It's the movie where Jack Nicholson dances in a beret to a song called Party Man. Party Man is a song about how cool it would be to be a party man, and also maybe a libertarian? A few years after this, Coke sold off Columbia to Sony for $3.4 billion, with a profit. Ghostbusters just kind of petered out. The cartoon chugged along for a few years before being cancelled in 1991. It was pushed to the graveyard slot to make way for Hammerman, the cartoon about MC Hammer. surprisingly it only lasted one season. Go figure. That was it for a while. For the rest of the 90s, not much really happened with the Ghostbusters IP. In 1997, there was a continuation of the real Ghostbusters called Extreme Ghostbusters, a very 90s cartoon about Egon and the next generation of Ghostbusters. It was even pretty progressive for the time, having Garrett, a wheelchair user, and Kylie, the first proper female Ghostbuster, as mainstays on the team. It didn't last very long enough to get toys of every character except Garrett. Slimer got one though. So did the Pumpkinhead ghost, who doesn't even appear in the show. That feels a little ableist. In 2009, we got Ghostbusters the video game. It's the first project since Ghostbusters 2 to feature the four main actors back together. Developed by Terminal Reality, it's a third-person shooter where you play as a new hire for the Ghostbusters. The credited writers are Harold Ramis and Dan Aykroyd, but that's a bit of a lie. John Melchior, the game's executive producer, said that despite being solely credited to them, it was written alongside a team of writers at Terminal Reality, who worked with them to help mold the game's dialogue and levels into something more fitting. It is considered by Aykroyd and Ramis to be the definitive Ghostbusters 3, but that's not the whole story. This is where Ghostbusters becomes a nostalgic property as opposed to a modern thing. It's far enough in the past to be considered a cemented classic, and now can be marketed as that thing you remember. The era it was released in becomes part of the product. Every few years, a new release of Ghostbusters will happen, celebrating however many years with new merchandise. It's like regular anniversaries, but with a new director's commentary and some plastic tat, instead of overpriced rings and despising your husband. That doesn't explain how it was sustained for so long though, and the answer to that is the internet and Ghostbusters 3. Between the releases of Ghostbusters 2 in 2016, the internet came into being, and with it, fan communities could be built from nothing through shared interests on forums and blogs, etc. During this time, the Ghostbusters community became a thing through places like gbfans.com and Spook Central, places where Ghostbusters fans could go to discuss movies and fandom events and anything related to Ghostbusters. Why go to these sites for news on a franchise that was largely absent? Well, there's the obvious stuff like new releases or unseen footage or goings on within the fandom, but mainly it was the mythological Ghostbusters 3. After 2, Reitman, Aykroyd and Ramis would spend 2 decades working on the final movie in the trilogy to tie up every loose end within Ghostbusters. The script went through so many different drafts, with new people being brought in to help write it, going back and forth on whether characters would even appear, and even going as far as who was directing it. Thing is, every so often, a new nugget of information would crop up to let Ghostbusters fans know it's coming, and they'd patiently await the day they could see their favourite characters reunite on the big screen. This would only bring more people to these sites and get more people involved in the Ghostbusters fandom. The game only made these cries louder. The Ghostbusters community was rallied under one desire: we want Ghostbusters! And then the monkey's paw curled. Because they get more Ghostbusters, just not in the form they wanted. Harold Ramis passed away in February of 2014. There's not a joke I can make about that because I liked his work and death is shit. I'd like to think I'm above exploiting dead people I genuinely respect. Keep that sentiment in your mind. We're gonna come back to it. At this point in time, the rights to Ghostbusters were with multiple parties. Reitman, the original 3 Ghostbusters, and Sony. To make a Ghostbuster, every party would have to agree. If one person declined, that was it. No Ghostbuster. When Ramis died, Reitman realised that Ghostbusters 3 would never get made at this rate, so he made a deal, convinced everybody, and the rights to Ghostbusters went fully to Sony. Like any budding massive corporation, Sony dropped everything immediately to set up a division in their company just to handle Ghostbusters called GhostCore, to try and turn Ghostbusters into a cinematic universe. Cinematic universes are a plague inflicted upon us by Kevin Feige. He had the bright idea to make interconnected universes out of movies based on Marvel characters, and then fundamentally changed media forever. Sony, also having the rights to some Marvel characters, have been trying for the better part of a decade to ride this success with Spider-Man, but after the amazing movies failed, they just gave up and let him be boring in the MCU. And that's what Sony wanted Ghostbusters to be, something you could build an interconnected universe from and expand to so many different mediums. Since its inception in 2016, Ghost Corps have released 2 movies that are not connected in the slightest, so great start. Ghostbusters 2016 is... okay, it's not actually called that. The real title is Ghostbusters Answer the Call. It makes sense, kind of. What do Ghostbusters do? Answer phones? Might as well just call it Ghostbusters Bust the Ghosts. Alright, I've delayed long enough. I'm dreading talking about this movie because it's mainly defined by one thing. Ghostbusters Open the Fridge features a main cast of women and was released in 2016, a year where things happened. That means wading through the sewer of responses was unbearable. You had a very sexist backlash, and then a media backlash calling everyone who disliked the trailer for the movie a sexist. Let's look at a case study. James Rolfe is a very famous internet figure, made popular for his role as the angry video game nerd. James Rolfe is also a fan of Ghostbusters. People asked him what he thought about the reboot trailer, so he made a video called Ghostbusters 2016, No Review, I Refuse. It is a very tame video in which the main sentiment is that he would not review the new Ghostbusters because he doesn't like how it looks. And then it got weird. Multiple think pieces were written about how this was in fact a sexist view because the marketing of a movie did not convince someone to see it. Then the fucks on 4chan got to it. Slash TV reacts to James Rolfe AVGN Becoming Uncut is a video with about 400,000 views that involves a bunch of people taking this as a victory against the Jews. Pause. One side in this is very clearly worse than the other, and that is worth pointing out. I'm not trying to argue for horseshoe theory here. Being a bit overzealous while supporting fairly noble causes is a lot better than bigotry. If you've been on the internet around these spaces long enough, you know exactly what happened here. The main people instigating the sexist, racist hate against the Ghostbusters trailer never really cared about Ghostbusters and were pushing it as an important thing so they could hide behind the plausible deniability in regular people who just disliked the trailer, convincing some of them that this was a plot against them so they could red pill them into becoming actual fascists. If that sounds ridiculous, it literally happened 2 years before when a bunch of losers made up a fake cause because they were pissed game journalists had different opinions from them. And surprise, surprise, some of the most vocal bigots from this were the same grifters from that. Milo Yiannopoulos, the Kotaku in Action subreddit, and Sargon of Akkad. Hindsight is 2020, but people fell for it. They genuinely thought people were angry about Ghostbusters. Sure, some were, but that's the dangerous bit. There were so many articles written about the backlash that were largely uncritical of the fascists. Then you had willing idiots who were trying to argue that the backlash was fabricated by Sony to sell tickets. Red Letter Media made a video trying to argue this, but pro tip if you want to convince anyone that something isn't sexist, maybe don't use a website as a source called manlymovie.net. That'd be like if I released a video with the wild claim that babies were not a protected class and the source I used was, I don't know, ikillbabies.com. RLM aren't fascists, but they were complacent in arguing that there was nothing to worry about in the backlash. Granted, Not all like this. Some writers were able to draw the clear link between the fascists and the backlash, and nowadays people are a lot smarter than that. It's a lot easier to notice weird guys. When was the last time you heard anybody give a shit about failed politician Carl Benjamin? Some people were just angry about Ghostbusters. Some people are still angry about Ghostbusters. Chris Bores, aka the Irate Gamer, aka the Ghost Doctor, made a video about how female Ghostbusters were the result of a paranormal pandemic in 2020. During an actual pandemic.
You're sexist if you don't want to go along with girl Ghostbusters or the Watchmen show that pits whites versus blacks. This is why. They want this tension to build. You know, there's so much footage out there on YouTube now of people just, in their own minds, they think they're doing the right thing. And if you think things are bad now, just wait until these people start dying. They're going to stay earthbound and create more misery for people on this planet and just continue to manifest into, you know, these creatures.
Oh no! It was the ghosts all along! The ghosts were feminizing our Ghostbusters and making the cops evil! Actually, I take this all back. I don't want to mess with this guy. If his banner is anything to go by, he's got the Lantern Corps on his side! Oh my god, I forgot to review the movie! It's fine? Despite the controversy being so wide-reaching, there's really not that much to talk about in terms of the movie itself. Really is just a beat-for-beat remake of the original. Again. It's a funny movie. I was pretty entertained throughout. The characters are fun. One criticism I could levy against the original movie is Winston getting criminally underutilized. His role in the original script was much larger. Patty's character gets that original concept back, being the one who knows the city inside and out. Holtzman serves as the wild card, and Abby and Aaron get their own arc that serves as the heart of the movie. They really take advantage of how good the cast is. The effects are neat. The ghosts have a neon aesthetic created by actors being physically on set wearing light kits, edited later with visual effects to look like actual ghosts and not just grubby people with LEDs strapped to them. It's not trying to look like the original, and while I think the direction doesn't even compare, the ghosts are a unique take that I think look quite good in motion. But it is a reboot that is also partly a remake, and that's its main issue. It follows the original's plot to a T. The cold open, first ghost sighting that forms the Ghostbusters, montage, evil person opening the gate, possession, government shutdown, big battle, destroyer, end. We've been through this motion before, and we know why these movies are made now. It's the merchandise. And in the 2.5 decades since the release of Ghostbusters 2, nothing has changed. Ecto Cooler came back, you could go to Wayback Burgers and get a Stay Puft Slime Shake, and it only took us 3 movies, but we finally have Ghostbusters branded Twinkies. They made 2 flavors, White Fudge Marshmallow based on Stay Puft and Key Lime Slime based on Slimer. They made a lot of food-like products this time around. I say food-like because I don't know if Twinkies can legally be counted as real food. We all know the end of this story. Proper noun, adjective the noun, was a financial flop, making $229 million on a budget of $144 million. It resulted in a loss of $70 million for Sony. Hollywood. And after all that, we've finally done it. We've killed Ghostbusters! Yeah, baby! After the failure of movie film the cinema, we proved to Sony that you can't just hold the things we remember above our head and expect us to pay for it. We're smarter than that. The consumers won. There will never be another Ghostbusters movie! 2016 was an interesting year to release a Ghostbusters reboot. Not because of the year itself, but rather the year that came before. By 2015, nostalgia was proven to be a profitable thing to cash in on, and Hollywood was still trying to capture that with reboots. You take an old property, keep the general concept, ideas, imagery, and you replace everything else. Transformers, RoboCop, Conan the Barbarian. You get new movies without the baggage of having to come up with original ideas, and you still got the inbuilt fan base of the old movies. Hollywood was obsessed with reboots as the next big idea. It's partly why Ghostbusters Reboot the franchise was made, to get the new generation into Ghostbusters and to rope in old fans with the imagery they recognize. But it wasn't working out. Full reboots were not successful. So how are you meant to make $1 billion off of old ideas? Well, you can still reboot it, just stop halfway. In June of 2015, Jurassic World came out, had the biggest opening weekend of all time, and became the third highest grossing movie ever made. Jurassic World takes the things people liked about Jurassic Park, ignores the things they didn't, and continues on 20 years later. In December of 2015, Star Wars Episode 7 came out, had the biggest opening weekend of all time, and became the third highest grossing movie ever made. Star Wars Episode 7 takes the things people liked about Star Wars, ignores the things they didn't, and continues on 30 years later. The success of these movies told Hollywood one thing: reboots are out, soft reboots are in. Why throw the baby out with the bathwater when you can just chuck the baby and keep the bathwater? It's no longer about just using the brand name and hoping it works. It's a game of chicken where studios see how much of a thing they can keep before the audience gets rowdy. Aside from sexism, this was the main conversation around Ghostbusters at the time. Why can't we just get the old Ghostbusters back to bring in the new generation? And like it or not, that's what we got. Ghostbusters Afterlife is directed by Ivan Reitman's son, Jason Reitman. He directed Juno and is also Ivan Reitman's son. Get it? It's the new generation picking up the torch. It's also nepotism, which is a crime. The movie involves Egon's family moving out to his farmhouse after his mysterious death. It stars Finn Wolfhard from Stranger Things as Trevor, Carrie Coon as their mother, and McKenna Grace as Phoebe. She's the best part of the movie, and I hope she shows up in a good movie one day. Phoebe spends the movie exploring her connection to Egon as a child prodigy, keeping toe-to-toe with her teacher Paul Rudd and befriending a child named Podcast. We kind of waffle around in this for the first half of the movie. An unseen hand helps Phoebe as she discovers her history and becomes a Ghostbuster. Trevor makes some friends at his new job. They bust a ghost and accidentally end up destroying the town. They end up in prison. Phoebe uses her one phone call to call Ray from Ghostbusters. Ray talks about how much of a bastard Egon turned into. Actually, the main takeaway for most of the movie is that Egon was a prick to everyone who cared about him. We find out he ran away from his friends and family because he thought something terrible was going to happen and Gozer would rise again. It's fine though, because he was right. As long as you can prove your obsession was justified, being a terrible father is fine? Oh shit, yeah, Gozer's in this movie! The second half is just the end of Ghostbusters again. It is fundamentally impossible to make a Ghostbuster without tripping up and accidentally making the first movie again. Paul Rudd goes to Walmart and gets attacked by a bunch of tiny Stay Puffs. They serve no purpose other than to be on the poster. Look, I don't want to be that guy who complains about lore, but there is something terrifying about taking one of the original's best jokes and making them minions. Paul Rudd gets attacked by a demon dog and becomes a gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper is looking for the Keymaster, and the Keymaster is Phoebe's mom, and oh no, ghosts have been released, and oh no, Gozers have been unleashed, and J.K. Simmons there for like 2 seconds, and I'm just exhausted. Yada yada yada, they have to find out a way to trap Gozer. It turns out Egon's house is a big ghost trap, and the end of the world is happening again, and our protagonists are outmatched, and then the original Ghostbusters show up. I guess they were just standing there. But then all seems lost, and a hand appears helping Phoebe hold the proton pack, and the camera pans up, and it's a weird, creepy, CG, dead Egon ghost. Egon's ghost is a weird, slightly horrifying CG creation who just kind of sulks about and doesn't say anything. He gets a moment with his daughter who he abandoned, and everybody cries. Except Bill Murray, who looks genuinely uncomfortable being there. Did you know you can buy a toy of this? It's sold out now, but you could buy a 2-pack of Phoebe and Ghost Egon exclusively at Target called, and I am not kidding, The Family That Busts Together. Alright, I'm taking the veil down for a second. I promised myself I would not make a busting joke in this video. It's overdone, it's overplayed. I get it, it's funny, it sounds like cum, haha. Homestuck has done it at this point, and if there's something I can pride myself on, I'm better than Homestuck. But could you really not come up with a better name than The Family That Busts Together? This came out while the movie was still in cinemas. These figures were not produced because of some overwhelming demand for it. This was okayed before the movie was even finished. That's how it works. You can't just rush these things into production. These sat on a drawing board for years because someone had the conscious decision to make a toy of the dead man because they knew it would make Ghostbusters fans cry. It removes any plausible deniability that this is not the most cynical cash grab, because that's all this is now. It's a movie designed to make guys with a shelf of Funko Pops as the backdrop of their YouTube videos upload a video called Ghostbusters Afterlife. Easter eggs explained. Did you notice the Crunch Bar wrapper? Did you notice the stacked books? Multiple characters are now just obsessed with Bible verses because that was a thing in 1984. Egon wasn't even in that scene. Why would he give a shit? If you can't tell, I hate this movie. I hate this movie with every fibre of my being. It's a slog to get through. It's not entirely without merit. It's nice that there's a movie released in 2021 that uses pretty good looking practical effects. But even then, what's the purpose? In the original, almost every element exists to generate a contrast. 4 exterminators dealing with a supernatural crisis with the attitude of just clocking in another shift. These grand, beautiful special effects shots alongside just static shots of another day in the job of exterminators. Contemporary 80s songs alongside this very eerie score. The whole comedic concept the movie runs on relies on this. The movie is explaining these wild Sumerian deities through the mouth of Rick Moranis. It's a comedy, it's funny, it's brilliant. Afterlife genuinely thinks Ghostbusters is the coolest shit and loses the edge that made Ghostbusters good. The movie doesn't have a practical demon dog for any other reason than that's how it was in the original. It's trying to make you remember a good movie instead of just being a good movie. That should be it, right? This is the lowest point of Ghostbusters. We can't get any lower than this. We should just bring in the conclusion and go on with our day. Nope. Official Ghostbusters NFTs.
In celebration of the release of Ghostbusters Afterlife, around 3,000 mini puffs have come to break the internet. We tried to think of the most harmless thing, something that would never ever possibly destroy us. We miscalculated.
That's one way to put it. Just before you thought we couldn't get any more depraved, they made NFTs of the worthless comedy Stay Puft characters. That's just poetic, isn't it? I guess Ghostbusters Afterlife really was in line with the original. The original was about 4 cynics exploiting dangerous things people didn't understand for money, and now that's real. And this will keep happening. Ghostbusters Afterlife made $197 million on a budget of $75 million. They completely sold out of NFTs, and I've already mentioned that the Ghost Egon sold out of pre-orders just like the original real Ghostbusters toys. Afterlife even ends on a post-credit scene of Winston helping fund the next generation of Ghostbusters in the old firehouse, with the ghost storage lighting up. As I was redrafting, they've already announced a new Ghostbusters game that follows up on this. Ghostbusters will come back, and it'll come back again and again until the heat death of the universe. And then again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. I've got a confession to make. I've been lying to you. All the way back in part 2, I talked about how Ghostbusters toys probably created the obsession over Ghostbusters iconography, even though they had very little to do with the show that they were based on. And when asked why, I shrugged. That wasn't an entirely truthful shrug. I know exactly what they were based on. And it's this. The unaired, lost, real Ghostbusters pilot. Well, okay, this isn't actually the pilot. This is an empty film canister that I found on eBay for about £8 that I pulled out for dramatic effect. I did not find the pilot. It's been on YouTube in high quality for years thanks to the work of a talented Ghostbusters fan who stumbled upon the original film and remastered it in HD. So, I guess that's twice I've lied now. As an individual piece of art, it's not particularly interesting. It's well animated, it's basically an extended animated music video. Barely has a narrative as much as it is just the Ghostbusters bumping into ghosts and then catching the ghosts. The most interesting part of it is hindsight. You can look back at this and pinpoint every single recognizable piece of Ghostbusters. The song, the car, the firehouse, the technology, the ghosts, the marshmallow. It's all here. It's what created the toy line. That's why the first wave featured Stay Puft, and why Slimer was such a mainstay of the show, and why the toys have very little to do with the show they're actually based on. Because they're not based on the show, they're based on the thing produced in a few weeks to sell marketing executives on the idea that Ghostbusters would be profitable. It's what has persisted within the public consciousness too. I'm not innocent in all this. The reason I'm here today talking about Ghostbusters is because I was a Ghostbusters fan as a kid. I used to think Ghostbusters was my favourite movie. I still love it now, but I was a Ghostbuster through and through. I have distinct memories of waking up in the morning to my tiny tube TV still playing the early 2000s 3D model of New York that made up the DVD menu. And these are my Ghostbusters toys. If you're wondering how I got into Ghostbusters, this is how. I've had these longer than I can remember. I didn't even watch the show they were tangentially based on. I literally had no choice but to love Ghostbusters because I was a baby and my mum bought toys off eBay. That's just what big blockbuster movies are now. It's shoving the stuff we know and remember in our face. Just last year, Spider-Man No Way Home became the 6th highest grossing movie of all time. They took Into the Spider-Verse, a story about a boy finding out who he is through his diversity, and made it into a story about 3 of the same white guy. Because people remembered the other 2. That's not an original take. Everyone knows how this shit works now. This is the part where I do a call to action and talk about how we need to take charge as consumers, because it can't possibly be the mega corporation's fault for following the money. No. It is their fault. We cannot fix this. You are not in control. Vote with your wallet is a widely thrown about phrase, as if the act of buying things was a democracy. Alright then, let's do that. Let's go vote. It's a Friday and I want to see a movie on the big screen. If I want to support a movie, that'd be the best way. At time of writing, April 1st, a good few movies just came out in my local cinema. The movies currently playing are Morbius, The Batman, Ambulance, Broadcast Signal Intrusion, Belfast, The Duke, Uncharted, X, Death on the Nile, Sonic 2, The Bad Guys, and the Nan movie. That's 12 movies I have to choose from. Already, without my knowledge, a choice has been made for me, because these are not all the movies out in cinemas. A week ago, The Worst Person in the World came out. I was lucky enough to see that movie at a film festival, but film festivals don't come around every week, and it never even got put on at my local cinema. Even then, we've already run into another problem, because the only movies playing more than once a day are either franchise movies or based on something. Morbius, The Batman, Sonic 2, and The Bad Guys. Everything else, it's one time or you aren't getting to see it. Call this anecdotal, but it is statistically more difficult for people near me to support smaller movies. It's simple maths. The more times a movie is shown in a day, the more likely it is to make money. I have no decision in that. That's how fucking numbers work. And then, that's completely ignoring the fact that not everyone is like me. People genuinely do like whatever Marvel movie is out at the time, and I hated it, but the general consensus is that Ghostbusters Afterlife is the best since the original, and that's not my choice to take that away from them. Children also exist, and I don't think they care about supporting independent cinema. You cannot blame consumers for something they have such a small part in, because the decisions are made by the people who have the money. In 2015, Quentin Tarantino booked out his favourite theatre in LA so he could show his new movie there. Disney saw this, wanted to show Star Wars there instead, and threatened to pull Episode 7 from all of the parent company's theatres in LA if they did not get their way. And of course they got their way. They're fucking Disney, they own everything. Maybe streaming will help. Now time is not an issue and you can watch movies whenever you want. Maybe we'll become a meritocracy. Up until the late 40s, movie studios could own cinemas and exclusively show their own movies there. The US Supreme Court decided that's a little crook and banned it. Guess who owns the streaming services now, fucko? And then there's Ghostbusters. The first Ghostbusters did so well they made another one, and it bombed. So that's it then. Ghostbusters isn't profitable. Then they made another one, and it bombed. So that's it then. Ghostbusters isn't profitable. And then they made another one, and that did well. Columbia failed twice and still kept making them. 4 decades ago, Ronald Reagan's administration decided that advertisements were okay to show on children's television, and even when people fought back with mountains of evidence, they still couldn't win. They created 40 years worth of pop culture and nostalgia for icons, Transformers, Mario, Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, because some guys had enough money to make it so. That's the real legacy of Ghostbusters. What carried forward wasn't an original, almost perfect comedy by 4 friends that beat the odds and got big. It was the icons. Over time, all that got washed away because they kept making it again and again, and every single time something got scrubbed away until what remained was quotes and logos. People like to talk about what killed Ghostbusters. Some say Ghostbusters died when the 2016 movie came out. Others say it died when Harold Ramis died. Some would even go as far back as Ghostbusters 2, but I disagree. Ghostbusters died when some marketing executive saw the pilot for the real Ghostbusters and decided that the little green guy would look good on a t-shirt. I usually like to end these videos on a joke, but I really can't come up with anything this time. That's it. They won. Go home. In the immortal words of Ernie Hudson, as Winston said more in Ghostbusters 2, Ghostbusters doesn't exist.
Thank you. Call anytime.
Look, that's it. I've had it, Ray. No more parties.
Here's your share.
Look, I'm tired of taking abuse from overprivileged 9-year-olds.
I know, Z, but we can't quit now. The holidays are coming up. It's our best season.
Ray, man, face it, Ghostbusters doesn't exist.